Welcome, Wargamers. It has been a long time since we've explored any lore about the Kharadron Overlords, but that changes today. Games Workshop was kind enough to send me an advanced copy of their new battletome for 2nd edition, and that's what I'm diving into in this video. Now, this video is going to be building upon a series that I did for Kharadron Overlords a while back, and I'll leave a link in the description down below for you, though I will admit I've considered redoing it because I've improved my craft as speechmanship and also just technical stuff like a new mic and things like that along the way. But for today's purposes, a great deal of the core history and drama surrounding that faction can be found in that video series. So this is something that interests you, go check those out for sure. In short, the Kharadron Overlords are a faction of Duwarden, traditionally known as dwarves, who escaped the Age of Chaos by using their superior flight technology to ascend to the skies far above the reaches of the initial Chaos forces. However, this was far from safe, and they are constantly hunting and mining new sources of their fuel, ether gold, which is kind of a cloud-like substance that they can use to power all of the anti-gravitational stuff they need to stay in the air. They've developed a highly complex society based around what they call the Code, a set of laws that dictates nearly every aspect of Kharadron Overlord life. This code keeps their entire empire on the same page and has built a government based on commerce and personal achievement. And that is the short of it, right? The elevator pitch for the Kharadron Overlords. If you want to know more, go ahead and, like I said, check out those videos in the link down below. Their origin story about going into the skies initially is probably one of my favorite tales in Age of Sigmar. But with every 2nd edition battletome, Games Workshop has done a few things. They've added how the Necro Quake affected the faction, and really taken the chance to fine-tune their lore, and they really delivered in this book. In fact, when we're talking about books that their lore really got reworked in a way that makes it more exciting to learn about, I have to say this is one of my top contenders for best 2nd edition battletomes out there. Let's start with the more concrete lore stuff. There's a few things I want to touch on that aren't necessarily, as I would say, concrete. The Necro Quake was a setting-wide event where Nagash, god of undeath, attempted a massive ritual to basically kill everyone and raise them as undead under his command. It largely failed, but not completely. It still, totally disrupted the nature of magic within the realms. It gave us endless spells and raised thousands of restless dead under no control across the realms, and it was the birth of the Night Haunt faction. So really this event was world-shaping, a pivotal moment that touched the lives of every person in the mortal realms, either directly or indirectly. And all of the 2nd edition battletomes have had a section on how this event affects them. And I like it. It's a direct reason for escalation and tension, and a chance to include everyone in the grand story instead of saying oh, and these guys, they're also here, right? Without any real connection to the grand story arc of Age of Sigmar. Now, the Kharadron Overlords have a unique name for the Necro Quake. They, in their own society, call it the Garak Tormund. And it's a huge event in their history. The sheer shockwave of magical energy that burst from Shyish sent ripples in every single realm, including Chaman, the realm of metal, which is the home of the Kharadron Overlords. Now, oftentimes the book describes Kharadron Overlord flight as if they use nautical term like trade routes, and they describe pathways in the skies as currents, like the wind is kind of operating kind of like a current in the ocean type stuff, all of that. So this event is equivalent. I'm gonna back away and use real world examples here for us. It's the equivalent of a tsunami coming in, crashing against all of their ports, and spread around the realm, right? It's just this huge thing. But imagine a tsunami so big that it changed the way the ocean worked. Okay, in our real world. Think about that for a second. Imagine a wave of such magnitude that it sunk huge land masses. It reversed rivers. Mountains became islands, but also at the same time, huge stretches of land that were long underwater broke up and jetted into the surface. Ocean currents displaced or reversed entire coral reef shoals, moved hundreds of miles. You get the idea of what I'm saying. When the intensity of the Necro Quake descended upon Chaman, that happened to the Kharadron Overlords. Ships were knocked out of harbor and often annihilated, torn to shreds by the sheer force beating upon them. Safe travel routes became epicenters of carnage as the realms tore apart. The relative safety of the skyports was tested. Even their mind-bending size offered no firm ground. Right? Buildings collapsed, citizens were bucked off the side of it, meaning they literally got jetted off into nothing. In addition to that, colossal night haunt processions crashed into them because the night haunt don't think you're special because you can fly. And so they're reeling from what is essentially an earthquake/tsunami, and they're trying to rally a defense against an invader. And this is interesting to think about when you're a faction that's, you survived this long because nobody could reach you, but instantly there's an army on your doorstep. No one could see any of this coming. So all in all, we can agree this was a bad day to be a Kharadron Overlord. In fact, one of the darkest in their history. There's no definitive number to the death toll. In the book, Barak-Nar does their own kind of investigation and estimated that 1/5 of its ships and army were wiped out instantly. And when you're talking something that's supposed to be almost like its own nation unto itself, 1/5 just being deleted is almost unimaginable. In addition to that, a new threat began to prowl the skies. Endless spells. Semi-sentient conjurations of magic roamed the clouds. Usually, magic, if you made some kind of magical casting at somebody, would dissipate naturally, but the Necro Quake broke the laws of what we would call physics, but in their thing is magic, around. So now all of a sudden these spells, they don't go away, they just keep going. And there's a few blurbs of endless spells causing trouble for the Kharadron Overlords, and my personal favorite is that there's a ship from Barak Zilfin. It's their flagship called the Sunderer, and it gets cut in half from an ether void pendulum. And the whole thing just toppled in twain to the ground below. Now I go through all of this detail to really emphasize that this event, it broke their world, right? Their own personal world that they understood was just coming apart at the seams. Because when the dust settled, the initial lash of energy had passed, the Kharadron Overlords looked outside of their skyports and saw the devastation around them. And going back to our tsunami, right, that changes how the ocean works, the skies of the realm of metal were changed completely. Long-claimed ether gold deposits were broken up, tossed around, moved incredible distances, new caches were revealed, long-held mining operations left without an owner, and in this near destruction of a faction, opportunity had revealed itself. There was a huge portion of the code dedicated to mining rights. Of course, this makes perfect sense. Who owns what the charges for poaching are, claiming new veins of ether gold, all these things. Well, this event knocked away all of the reasonable claims to existing ether gold. If you had a mine, but now all of a sudden the gold that was in that mine, let's say from our tsunami or a big, theoretical earthquake, all that gold inside that mine gets thrown 20 miles away, what's to say that that gold is yours, right? Because you owned the mine, you owned the land, but you didn't claim the gold inside of it. Now that gold's somewhere else. You don't have claim over that. Who's to say that's the same gold from the mine that you used to own? You claim this space over there that now has nothing. And so they're in this weird position where on one hand, you have absolute tragedy, right? A crushing blow to any faction to lose 1/5 of your fighting strength, of your might, of your technological superiority. It's huge. But there's also this kickoff to the greatest gold rush in Kharadron Overlord history. Because all the veins that were previously claimed were done so over time, right? All these things happened over the hundreds of years between their founding of their faction to the now. They were keeping the society going and slowly expanding outwards. Some families had their companies and lineage built upon these huge, reliable veins of ether gold, and the technology to harvest it better and better had evolved over time. But now, instead of all those discoveries and innovations happening over time, they have skyports full of top-of-the-line ships, no claims on any gold, and it's open season. So the effects of this event are obviously direct, but one of the indirect ones is the colossal shift in their economics and lifestyle. So this faction is now like spreading far and wide, it's like a gold rush. Like I said, they're trying to claim every single thing they can. Long-standing companies based upon reliable wealth have been shifted, so maybe they are losing money now because they have all these ships, but they don't have any claims on Ether Gold, whereas some of the smaller companies might be rising in power as they were the first ones to claim it. It's a big mix-up. And I find that all incredibly interesting. And if you go watch those videos I did about Kharadron Overlords, you know that this is actually a really big deal for them and their society. But now I want to move away. Like that's like the real concrete addition to this book. A lot of the character entries and the unit entries and the kind of overall feel of the faction remains relatively the same. But there's something about the book that isn't, concrete, it's not a straight addition to the book. It's the subtle things that bring the faction to life. And there's really two of them that I want to focus on. One of them is that the book really has a much more interesting take on the code, right, segments of it, and then also focusing on businesses. So we'll start off with the code. This is a huge part of their lore, as I mentioned before and in other videos. This document that keeps their society together and governs all aspects of their life and their worldview. But in the older book, we got snippets of the lore here and there. It's like little blurbs between lore entries and that kind of thing, but it didn't feel totally immersive. It was a few things taken out of context. But in this book, this new 2nd edition battletome, there's actually a 2-page spread of articles, amendments, and footnotes, and they range from declarations of war to what is basically alcohol quality control. And I want to read to you my favorite. So this is Article 3, the Articles of Justice, point 5. All Haskell brewed, a Haskell being a Dwarden ale brewed and fermented over a course of many wind cycles. So, all Haskell brewed within a skyport is subject to regular inspection to be carried out by the Board of Brewmasters. Any guild company found guilty of thinning their product with bilge water, using inferior hops, or failing to allow appropriate fermentation time shall be fined to the full extent of the code permits, and its owners de-bearded and branded with the mark of the Gozengrim. Now, that's hilarious that there's actually laws based around how good your alcohol has to be. But down below that is Amendment 21, footnote 6. Brewing stations located within the high airs cannot be subject to point 5 of this article, the point we just read. In addition, the sale of inferior Haskell within foreign ports shall be permitted because the Umgi, humans, are content to drink any old swill. And that's an amendment proposed by Captain Magbeth Isram of Barak Mornar. And I think that's hilarious, right? We're going to have quality control laws for the alcohol that everyone drinks. But hey, let's make an amendment because you know what? We can still sell bad alcohol. We just sell it to humans who don't know any better. I love that. I think that that's hilarious. Now, there's actually also like trade embargoes on anyone the Kharadron Overlords have deemed as an enemy while they still breathe, with a footnote that clarifies embargoes on Ossiarch Bone Reapers because they don't actually breathe. It makes the code, right, this super fun thing to think about. And I want to see more of it, hopefully like in a White Dwarf or something, because not many other factions have like this one document that gives as much insight into their worldview and kind of lets you like, I don't know, get into their minds a little bit and have a little bit of fun. That last bit I think really brings the Kharadron Overlords to life is the focus on businesses. And in this book, they really lean into that. Previously, we knew that companies were the dominant power, right? They owned the ships, they fought for trade rights, hired crew, etc. You as a player, when you're playing your Kharadron Overlords army, were commanding a fleet owned by a company. But I never felt like they leaned into the commercialization angle much. That all these fun and random companies were really competing internally. And this book does a lot to change that, but it's very subtle. First up, they're just mentioned more. It just mentions the idea of independent businesses competing with one another a lot more. For example, the devastation of the Necro Quake we just talked about, they measure that up to 50 businesses foreclosed in its wake. Well, those businesses are mentioned because they're important. That's 50 armies that theoretically you as a player are playing. Think about that. how many ships a company has at its disposal, and since this gold rush is happening, companies rapidly trying to build as many ships as possible. All these things with the businesses kind of taking the forefront in terms of like, how do we understand this faction when they respond to crisis is much more prevalent. And I think the place where this really shines is the artifacts. Now, I don't actually have my old copy of the old book to compare the artifact names. I think that these are new. If they're not, I apologize, but I want to list off some of these artifacts in this book. We have Gadelson's Endless Repeater, Svereg Stein Illuminator Fire Pistol, Hegsun Solutions Old Reliable Hull Plates, Zonbar Core, Det Settler Spar Torpedoes, and Coalbeard's Collapsible Compartments. Guys, these are brands. I love this so freaking much, right? It makes me think of like the old-timey Wild West advertisements, right? Buffalo Bill's exhibition sponsored by the Winchester Repeater Rifle, right? And I just think it is hilarious. It's just that little bit of flavor added to things that makes it so stinking fun. I know it's a mouthful when you're trying to list off your artifacts and things like that, but it's just those little morsels of lore that are injected into the rules that I think make this faction so stinking cool. But it's also one of those things I can't really quantify, right? Like when we talk about how lore changes from battletome to battletome with every edition, it's one of those things it's not raw information, right? Like the Necro Quake stuff is just new information that was added. But between the code being, reimagined in new and fun ways, and the idea of leaning into brands and businesses as a forefront feature of this faction, it's just more fun, right? It's just a more fun, succinct, kind of on-brand battletome for this faction. I really do think it is a step up. It's fun, it's funny, and they still seem dangerous, right? It just leans more into what makes them unique, which I think battletome should always do. You should always walk away from your battletome being like, this is why I love this faction. I love it because of Coalbeard's collapsible compartments. That's just so stinking funny. I'd love to see ships that players do branded, with some of these things on their sides. I think that would be so hilarious. And so ending this video with why I think this is cool, I won't expand too much on it because I did cover a lot about why things are cool in the Kharadron Overlord series that I did. But with these changes and additions, really what it comes down to is I like the fact that the Necro Quake hit them hard, right? As a faction that can easily feel very isolated from world events because they just fly around, they just trade. And that's true. But what I like is that, in desperation, they found opportunity, and I feel like both elements of the desperate ramifications of the Necro Quake were very real and tangible, right? Barak Nar losing a fifth of their fighting force is a huge deal. I felt like they were truly rocked by the event in a way that was crippling. At least for a little while, they would have been crippled as they try to figure everything out and try to understand, okay, who's dead, who's not, what ships were lost, all that kind of thing. But at the same time, I feel like it does emphasize this is why this army has a leg to stand on in going forward, right? This is why. And they saw opportunity and they're not afraid to reach out for it. And so I thought that was great. I think they did the balance of desperation and opportunity very, very well. In addition to that, those little things that I talked about, the brands and the corporate focus and the code, those are all just things that I can't really explain it to you. But if there is a unwrapped copy at your local store or something like that, just flip through it because it just makes this a fun book to engage with. And I mean that, it's just fun to read. Even if you don't have an interest in the army, it's a fun book. And so I think that those are the best battle tomes, the ones where you don't even have to be super into it as an army, just read it. And I kind of feel that way about a few factions. I mean, even the ones that I kind of on the, side want to collect, but they're just still fun books to read, are the best battle tomes to play. So friends, tell me your thoughts on the Kharadron Overlords, how you think about the faction since it's been revitalized with all this stuff. Go ahead and leave in the comments down below. We'll continue the conversation down there. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.